morning, very warm welcome to Justice Squad 925 to Newcastle.
The new Supergrass laws were brought in because the police and prosecutors believed they were losing the fight against organised crime. Whether that threat is growing is difficult to prove, but every city has its violent criminals. Newcastle upon Tyne is no exception.
We have evidence that the gunman lay in wait to kill Mr Knight, and we certainly cannot rule out the possibility that it was as a result of a feud.
Gangster Freddie Knights was shot dead on his mother's doorstep. Police suspected he'd been killed by rivals. The chief suspect was John Sayers, a leading member of a well-known Tyneside crime family.
My dad and his brothers and his cousins, they've all been in prison. My dad got shot. My younger brother Michael, he got shot 6 times and survived. In 1990 I got 15 years for conspiracy to rob. 2007 I got 4 years for tax evasion. And in between that I've had 2-3 years in remand for different offences.
John Sayers and some of his associates were charged with the murder of Freddie Knights.
They said I had organised it.
How?
By planning it.
The murder trial was moved to Leeds amid high security. Armed police brought the defendants to court. Surveillance teams filmed everyone arriving. Despite the huge effort, there was still a serious security breach. A juror was phoned and threatened. Police investigated, but couldn't link it to anyone, so the trial carried on. 3 men were convicted of manslaughter, but not John Sayers.
John Henry Sayers was acquitted of all the charges after the 3-month trial at Leeds Crown Court.
Although John Sayers was now a free man, he believed he would always be a police target.
I knew they would leave us alone for a short while because they had been embarrassed. So I knew they would be coming back. Didn't know when or where, but I knew they'd be back.
7 years later, events at the murder trial came back to haunt him. A Supergrass came forward with dramatic new evidence that John Sayers had been behind the attempt to nobble the juror. This man, Errol Hay, was a Newcastle criminal and paid police informer. Hay claimed that during a visit to the court, he'd been instructed to make the threatening telephone call.
The only day he was there was when everything was explained in open court as to what had happened the night before. And that's where he learned about it. I knew he was an informer from years ago, so I didn't have anything to do with him.
Did he know him?
I knew him, yeah.
And what was he like?
Drug addict, little weasel.
Errol Hay said he'd been told what to do by John Sayers. Hay took police officers to this former mining village near Newcastle. He showed them the phone box he'd made the call from. The police already knew this was the correct phone box. They traced the threatening phone call soon after it had been made. This was the vital corroboration they needed before taking the word of a Supergrass.
If we are unable to corroborate what they have to say, or if we are able as a result of that exercise to contradict what they have to say, then it's extremely unlikely that we will be advancing them as credible witnesses of truth.
Following his success in the Noddy Rice murder case, prosecutor Kingsley Highland now signed a Supergrass contract with Errol Hay, who was given an alias. John Sayers was charged with conspiracy to pervert the course of justice.
What would have been the personal consequences of it going all the way?
Dying in jail.
The entire case relied 101% on Hay telling the truth. This was a one-witness case, and he was either telling the truth or he was not.
But some in the prosecution team already knew that Hay was telling lies. He'd beefed up his story by telling the police he'd made not just one phone call to the juror in Leeds, but 2. Again, he took them to the phone box he said he'd used. But this time when the police checked, there'd been no phone call. They couldn't find any record of anyone calling Leeds that night. And it called Hay's credibility into question. If he couldn't be believed about this call, why should he be believed about making that first threatening call?
The CPS knew, but the defence didn't, that no such call to Leeds that night could have been made from any of 48 boxes that were trawled and investigated within a 3-mile radius. If I had had this material when I was cross-examining Hay over, I think, 2 or 3 days, I would have exploded him as a witness of truth, and yet it was denied to the defence.
The jury nobbling case came to an abrupt end when the defence obtained the phone records that showed Hay was lying. They only got them late in the day from a police officer. They should have been handed over much earlier by the CPS. The judge was highly critical of the prosecution, saying there'd been a deliberate, conscious decision to flout the rules. He then ordered the trial be stopped. The person who failed to disclose the key evidence revealing the Supergrass had lied was the senior prosecutor, Kingsley Highland. The CPS refused to allow Mr. Highland to answer questions about this himself.
Would you categorise this as a gross failure?
The material should have been disclosed, and it wasn't, and it led to the halting of the prosecution. That has been a very painful experience for everybody concerned, and that case, together with 1 or 2 other ones, and meant that we're now dealing with disclosure with new systems in place to make sure that this sort of thing never happens again.
Errol Hay died of cancer shortly after giving his evidence. His Supergrass contract to tell the truth turned out not to be worth the paper it was written on.
It's too easy for anybody to go and tell lies without there being any fear of reprisal by the system. Once you accept it as a Supergrass, that's it. You can say whatever you want.
Isn't the point that the new system actually can't change the nature of these defendants, and we are in exactly the same place as we were when this system was discredited?
All I can say to you is that you have to make a decision in each individual case. We reject far more of these proposed agreements than we agree to. It is only when it is clear to us that we can put a witness forward in a way that will most benefit the public interest and convict serious criminals of very serious offences when we might not otherwise be able to.
The new generation Supergrass is too valuable to be ignored. So too was the old generation, until they were thoroughly discredited.